we take a deep breath, and then you dive into what do we do now? The hospital will be open, and you can start to come up with a long-term vision for the organization. So when I got here last fall, we came up with the compass, and at the bottom of the compass, it has our strategic and operational priorities, which at the time, of course, is to be day one ready, meaning open the hospital, one team, complete the merge with Subcenter, and then 5-star patient resident experience. And so those were really overarching goals that I used to focus the team over the last, whatever it's been, 8 months. So it's going to be imperative that you reset these, and that's where your strategic planning process will kick in. So with the whole point of the strategic planning process is to really to look out, I said here 3 years, maybe it's 5, something that might even be 20. Whenever I do the presentation talking about the critical access hospital funding method, we get that 1%. And so at some point, you're going to be thinking about replacing this brand new hospital because it will be older more now. And that's crazy to think about today. Your strategic planning process will start to think about that and say, what is that next thing? So you go through a series of questions. So where are we at now? And so we're going to have a brand new hospital as well. Where are we going? And this is where each of you today agree we're going to open the hospital. But maybe what that hospital looks like, you could very easily have different visions and versions of what that is. And so the process will help flush that out amongst you and even amongst the community to be able to say, this is what our hospital should look like. And this is the next thing that we should go achieve. The big question is, how do we get there? So we could say, yeah, we're going to open a cath lab or something, really big. But how do we get there? So that includes the people and the funding to be able to go through with that. And then this last question of how will we know? A lot of folks forget about that in the strategic planning process. And it's really important that you set a goal that you know when you've achieved it. We know the hospital's open or it's not. So we know when we've achieved that current goal. How do you know? And that's where sometimes coming up with most of those warm and fuzzy kumbaya goals doesn't serve you really the way you intended it to, because you don't know when you actually achieve that. So it's important to keep that in mind. So why do we even bother with strategic planning? You're about to hire a permanent CEO, you have a team in place, just go, right? The strategic plan really aligns that leadership. It aligns you as a group, as a board, helps set your priorities, and then you can navigate change. So you can say, this is our goal. This is where we want to be. Likely, my guess would be figuring out how to open the OR is probably one of your goals. And so if something happens in the regulatory environment or reimbursement model, you'll be able to respond and say, okay, that means we have to open the OR a different way, right? And so you can handle those changes when they come at you, and they will. Okay, so as with everything hospital related, there's regulations even for strategic planning. Okay, so the first one is your primary service area. I have seen board members get infuriatingly mad over the definition of the primary service area. Unfortunately, we don't get to pick it. CMS tells us that it's the smallest number of continuous zip codes to reach 75% of our patients. So it is possible. Those 6 zip codes in Sublette County. It's possible that 75% of your patients could come from 2 or 3 of those. And so whenever you put the primary service area map up on the board, it's going to be like, well, no, we forgot Cora or we forgot Daniel. It's entirely possible. It doesn't mean that we're not servicing those patients and servicing those residents. It just means Medicare's definition of our primary service area doesn't include those. The one that really gets people upset, it's possible that the zip code in LaBarge, maybe those residents love our services. And so as a result, they end up being in our primary service area, and maybe something else is not. And that really gets people upset. It's just a definition. The CMS requires us to look at it. Okay? So we don't get to pick it.
Can you restate that one more time?
Yeah.
75%. I just want to get that clear in my head.
Here's the trick. It's the smallest number of continuous zip codes. So we couldn't jump big piney to get to large. Okay? So it's the smallest number of continuous zip codes that represents 75% of our patients.
Thank you.
So I've been in large metro markets where there's hundreds of zip codes, and sometimes you'll strategically piece those together to accomplish your strategic goals. It impacts recruiting. For you, it won't impact your recruiting. In a metro market, it becomes really important. So, because those other zip codes, we still consider part of our service area. So that's where you have the secondary service area. Some people call it your market area. That's what you should focus on. So you take that CMS definition, we have to do it. We'll use it for where CMS tells us to. And then we're going to focus on our market area. For us, it's Sublette County. Maybe there's something that expands it beyond that, but likely in the next year, it's Sublette County that you're going to focus on. Market share, just like any other business, you want to know how much penetration do you have? What are you capturing? What are we losing to the out markets? So that's just the percentage of area patients choosing our hospital. And then your strategic priorities, some people call these initiatives. What are those really big things that we're going to go after? And that's those key priorities. Probably the OR, just guess. Okay. And this is where some of those priorities, those things that, hey, I think we might want to do, that's what you got to be thinking about. So I'm telling you this in June. So that way by November, you've had those lawnmower moments or gardening moments that say, hey, maybe we should do that. And that way you can surface those ideas amongst yourselves. So kind of your normal framework, you do an environmental scan. This is of gathering data. This is where HealthTech will become very valuable for you. Some communities do what's called they pronounce it China, which I really get annoyed with. Community health needs analysis, needs assessment. You are not required to do that as a governmental entity. It doesn't mean, and that's again, the IRS defines what constitutes a community health needs assessment. And so there's very specific rules that the IRS gives on accomplishing that. It doesn't mean you can't cherry pick and say, well, maybe we should do the community focus groups. Maybe we should do the surveys because they're valuable. It's good information to have. You're not required to do it. Okay. So you gather input from the board, the staff, the community, figure out what does everyone think their hospital is. Then you start to set priorities, and that's where you're focusing for where you can achieve the most. The really important one is to establish the goals and the metrics. These are concrete targets. We're going to open the OR and it's going to have 5 patients, whatever that is, then you know when you achieve it. And then a real critical item is that review process. Some organizations go through all this work, put together a strategic plan, make a real pretty binder portfolio out of it, and then they stick it on the shelf. And then 3 years goes by and they pull it out. What did we do last time? Oh yeah, we were supposed to open the OR. You don't write that organization. It becomes a living document that you're using to then check and say, are we achieving what we set out to do? Okay, so the board's role. Oh. So you're going to set the vision. You're going to approve those priorities. Really important role from the governance of the board. You're going to monitor the progress. That's going to look however you want it to look. Maybe it's a quarterly check-in, some type of monitoring, and then support and alignment. Likely the biggest thing there is going to be capital allocation. What do we do with the funds that we have available? I believe eventually not in the near term, but eventually, this organization has the ability to pull cash. And that's going to allow you to fund things if you're really, really focused and determined on doing it. So planning versus no planning. So of course, nothing says you really have to do this. You could, I mean, there's a few spots that you kind of have to fake it, but you can do an A level or you can do a D level. I would encourage you to go for the A. So without a plan, you become reactive in your decision making. You're scattering resources, so you're never pulling up any cash, because as soon as somebody says, hey, we need a new flux capacitor, you're like, yeah, let's get it. And so now you don't have the funds to build that OR because you've spent a bazillion times a penny at a time. You end up with unclear direction and competing priorities. And so your strategic plan will let you focus all of your energies and you weigh everything against those big goals. So then HealthTech, as I mentioned, they have a process that I'm sure they'll take you through. Many organizations do a retreat where you lock yourself in a room for a day and you go through soup to nuts, here's what we want. And it's really helpful to start thinking in June of what do you think the hospital should look like 3 years from now? What service lines should you do? How should you be using your capital assets? And maybe it's possible one of you says, no, the first thing we're going to do is pay off the USDA loan. That could be a strategic priority. And so you got to think through those things. And if you percolate on it for the next 5 or 6 months, you should have a really good retreat that you can have a lively debate and figure out where it is that you want to go. I'm sure your new CEO is going to give you a lot of ideas from their experience, and you can kind of coalesce around these are our priorities. You can't walk out of that meeting with 15 priorities. Everything's a priority, then nothing is. So you want to really focus it down. You have a small organization and come up with those key things. And how that have a process that this is the first page of their slide deck that they will take you through to help you achieve that goal. Happy to entertain any questions.
Not necessarily for you, but for the community needs assessment, I know we have that. Is that something that's done on a regular basis? Because it wasn't us that did
Public health, probably the last one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do they do that regularly at all, or do they not just?
I think, so I want to say, and please don't quote me because I might be mistaken, but I think the one they did was the only one that's been done in Sublette.
Okay.
So.
They're usually pretty expensive and it's a ton of work.
Yeah.
And that's where the IRS's definition, they want it to be all encompassing to include community health, include the school district. And then because in some communities, the hospital is the one that's required to do it. So they're paying for it. And then everyone says, oh, the hospital's going to do it. Like, oh, no. Like after school lunches, it's not a function of the hospital. And so it kind of sets weird expectations in the community. You can cherry pick the process.
In what situations would it be a requirement for hospitals?
If we were a freestanding 501c3
Okay.
without governmental support,
Okay.
then it's required.
I think biggest hardest thing for our board moving forward is to identify not too many
Yeah, absolutely.
goals and kind of really hone in on it. You know what I see as a challenge for us.
You said as opposed to like that full-blown expensive assessment, you can do like focus groups. And
Absolutely.
Can you speak to that a little bit more? Like,
Yeah, so your typical needs assessment, it requires you to do a series of surveys. You do some focus groups and town halls. That's where you're just soliciting input from the public. And so some organizations will send all of their providers a survey and ask them, well, you know, specific things. Some will make it more broad, that it's anyone connected in any way to healthcare in the community. And it's either it can be as simple as a survey monkey that goes out, or, you know, maybe you do hire a consulting firm to make sure that you hit, you know, the sheriff's department and your school counselors and those folks that also are touching the hospital in some way. And so you can kind of cherry pick what you want. The goal is to make sure that you get enough impact, enough data to say, there is enough demand that we could support this new service line. That's really what you're driving for from our perspective.
Have you worked for an organization who has gone through a community health needs assessment before? What's the time frame? I'm just ballpark.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that every organization I've ever been a part of has done one. It's like, oh, we're going to get this done in the next 5 months, and then it takes a year. And so it's always longer than what you think it'll be. And that's the challenge, because you have to be able to check all of those boxes for those organizations. They have to make sure that they're meeting all of the IRS definitions. So you can say, hey, we had 100 responses to our survey, and that's incredible, and move on. Whereas they might be like, we need like 50 more to make sure that we hit some threshold that they're trying to achieve.
I feel like that would be beneficial for our community, for us to do something like that.
So too, I think it would be hard to do soon though, like with the hospital just opening, because people are gonna have to experience it and use it
Right.
for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like their input, say, a few months will be a lot different than.
Yeah, agreed.
And that's where some organizations update their strategic plan annually. So you're setting a 3-year vision, but they're tweaking it every year to say, how are we doing? And maybe we thought we'd get further in a year than what we did, but maybe one of your priorities is to do a needs analysis. Maybe you don't call it a community health needs assessment, but a needs analysis. We want to solicit feedback and see how we're doing in the community our first year. That could be one of your priorities. And we are.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
Appreciate the presentation. It's helpful to refocus. I feel like I can put that on our next slate of things to look at again.
Everyone stop sharing.
Thank you.
Yep.
To be sure we mean right.
You gotta show.
It's kind of hard goal. A goal.